The piece that I wrote this morning for ThomHartmann.medium.com is titled, "There's a Nefarious Plot Underway Around the State of the Union Address." I find this absolutely fascinating. There are all these Republicans who are tweeting and they're on Facebook and they're ranting on right-wing talk radio about how Joe Biden has not held a State of the Union address. The State of the Union address is typically in the first week or two of February, and, it's kind of a tradition. It dates back to the 1930s. Franklin Roosevelt started doing them fairly regularly. Before that, it was kind of hit and miss. The Constitution doesn't say that the president shall give a State of the Union address. It says from time to time, the president shall basically report to Congress. I'm doing this from memory rather than reading it from the Constitution, but this is the essence of it, that the president shall periodically report to Congress on the State of the Union. And FDR turned that into kind of a PR thing, as a way of pushing the New Deal. And every president since then has largely done that. And Biden's a little behind on this. So David Badash over at the New Civil Rights Movement compiled a whole list of all these tweets and things of all these people who are trying to saying, we need to have a State of the Union address. So we want now, why do the right-wingers want to hear from Joe Biden? I mean, just think about that for a minute. Why are all of a sudden all these right-wingers demanding that every single member of the House of Representatives, every single member of the United States Senate, the vice president and the president, all to get together in one room and listen to a speech by the president? Why would they do that? Why is this such a big issue? Why is it that right-wing talk radio is talking about it nonstop? USA Today, I mean, it's gotten so wild that USA Today, the national newspaper, published a fact check explaining that no, there's no constitutional requirement for the president to do a State of the Union speech. Thomas Jefferson used to hand them in writing. He was bashful. I mean, literally, he was a very shy person, and or didn't like to speak in public, let's say. And this is, I mean, this is just crazy. Why is this? And there's a lot of people who have been scratching their heads for about a week now, maybe a week and a half, since this noise really started about, we want a State of the Union. And then yesterday, the acting head of the Capitol Police, Yogananda Pittman, said this in sworn testimony before Congress, quote, "We know that members of the militia groups that were present on January 6th have stated their desires that they want to blow up the Capitol and kill as many members of Congress as possible with a direct nexus to the State of the Union." End quote. Oh my God. The Confederacy that declared war against America in 1861 was all about using violence to enforce white supremacy. To this day, white supremacists fight any attempts, these white supremacist Republican politicians fight any attempts to improve the lives of even the poorest of Americans. They oppose the minimum wage, they oppose expanding Medicaid, they oppose expanding food stamps, basically anything, all because some of those programs, all of those programs, might in some way benefit black people. I just sent off the manuscript, I mentioned this yesterday, on my next book in the Hidden History series, The Hidden History of American Healthcare. And, I spent the last year researching this book, and what I found was that literally every single time, from the late 1800s until the passage of Medicare in 1965, when various American presidents or high-profile American politicians tried to establish a national single-payer healthcare system in the United States, or any variation thereof, it was opposed by white Southern, largely Southern, not always, but white, racist, so-called conservative politicians who, up until 1965, actually bragged about the fact that they were opposing it because they didn't want black people to get any of those benefits. In the first book in the Hidden History series, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment, I laid out how the Second Amendment was written the way it was at the time it was to protect the slave patrols in Virginia and South Carolina, and how today's gun culture, in quotes, is rooted in white rage and white fear. I point out in the hidden history of the war on voting how from the 19th century forward they've been using voter suppression techniques to block the black vote. And that's why, we have several hundred pieces of legislation now introduced in state legislatures to make, in over 30 states, to make it harder for people to vote. So, it shouldn't be any coincidence that the people who attacked the Capitol, in addition to having T-shirts that say 6 million wasn't enough and other Nazi memorabilia, also were carrying Confederate flags. I think by and large Americans have figured this out, that the Trump MAGA movement pretty much begins and ends with white supremacy. There's a festival of white supremacy this weekend at CPAC in Washington, D.C. From their build the wall to putting brown children in cages to the Kung Flu slur to the Muslim ban, virtually everything Donald Trump has done or pushed flows back to trashing people who are not white. And his one legislative achievement, literally, in 4 years, he accomplished one thing. $1.5 trillion tax cut, 83% of the benefit went to rich, mostly white people. Meanwhile, the black police officers in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, there's a great story about it yesterday in the New York Times, talked about how they were beaten, spit upon, and called racial slurs, constantly being called the N-word by people in this, pro-Trump MAGA crowd. Why? Because that crowd was trying to end American democracy and replace it with strongman white supremacist rule. I really, this ideology, this belief that only white people should hold power or wealth in the United States has been at the core of the so-called conservative movement since the founding of this republic. And it continues to be the primary value of the mostly white Republican Party. Look at the judicial nominees that came out of the Trump administration. There might have been one person of color. Look at look at his cabinet, one person of color. What these guys are trying to do is continue the work that Tim McVeigh started. It started long before him, but in the modern era. And I think there's a direct line from Tim McVeigh to the siege in the Capitol. This is the third time that oligarchs, white supremacist oligarchs in America, have tried to overthrow our republic. The first time was in 1861 when they declared war on us. We beat them back. The second time was in 1933 when they tried to assassinate Franklin Roosevelt. The businessman's conspiracy. Google it if you're not familiar with it. Smedley Butler blew that up on them. Those were 80 years apart. The first was 80 years after the founding of the Republic. The second was 80 years after the Civil War. And here we are now 80 years after FDR's death, and they're trying to do it all over again. I am really concerned that if the few remaining Republicans of good conscience, the Mitt Romneys of the Republican Party, don't start speaking out loudly, especially now that Mitch McConnell went on Fox News last night and said, yes, I'd support Donald Trump, absolutely support him for president in 2024. If they don't start speaking out loudly, this little window in time and history for the Republican Party to return to some semblance of sanity that it had during the presidency of Dwight Eisenhower, that window is closing fast.